Welcome, everybody. Everything you need to know about rebranding your law firm. I'm Gideon Grunfeld, the president of Rainmaking for Lawyers. Delighted for the first time to be speaking with Scott Clauson, who goes by various titles: the founder, the president, the creative director of Clauson Arts. The one person I know who knows more about branding and rebranding and doing comprehensive rebranding for all sorts of entities, including law firms. So delighted to be doing this with you, Scott.
I think this conversation started a few years ago of starting to see that we're kind of like-minded in certain ways of how we envision helping companies and met through provisors. But as your journey of Gideon's journey of coaching and assisting law firms, and especially in this kind of transition transaction area of what to do next, we just felt like it was beneficial to put something together where we can take both of our skills and really just highlight how we can help and maybe help navigate through this process.
Perfect. So with that, let's talk about a little bit about a story which is, for me, quintessentially about branding. It started a few years ago. I was invited to attend a bar association meeting that in many respects is very similar to any other bar association meetings. It was a lunchtime presentation. It was at a hotel. There were about a couple, 300 people present. There was a guest speaker. It was at a pretty fancy hotel, and not atypically, I was cutting it pretty close, and I was there like 8 minutes in advance. I'm in my car, I'm in line, and there's valet parking only. And when I get to the front of the line, and now it's like 4 minutes before the event's beginning to start, I get out of my car, I hand my keys to the valet, and he looks at my car, and he says, "Sir, just wanted to let you know that your front left tire is a little short of air." And I didn't know that. I look around, I say, "Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me know. I'll take care of it later. Really appreciate it." Hand him the key, get my ticket, run inside. The presentation goes for, I know, an hour, hour and 20 minutes. I'm doing a little networking. It's now about an hour and a half later. There are about maybe 75 people all trying to get out of this event at exactly the same time. And there are all sorts of cars. And I give my ticket to the valet, a different valet, a different driver comes up. And how many of you can guess where this story is going? What would make this a branding story? What would make this memorable enough to think, wow, this is not just a description of what a company does, it's something memorable. And here's the memorable thing they did. While I was gone, entirely unexpectedly, they took my car, my beat up car that really did not look good in front of this hotel, and they filled the tire up with gas, with air. They filled the tire. Not only did they tell me there's a problem I didn't know, they fixed it. I wasn't a hotel guest. I didn't pay anything for this. I was amazed. It entirely exceeded my expectations. And I have probably told this story in the subsequent years to easily 5 to 10,000 people in speeches. And sometimes the connection between that story and branding, what I'm talking about today, is pretty tangential, Scott. Today, it is exactly on point because that story for me demonstrates exactly what the difference is between having a company and doing what it's supposed to do and doing something so unusual, so special, so unexpected, something that creates a memory, evokes feeling and emotion that is at least something to do with what a brand is. So that is what Scott and I are going to talk about. And before we get into the details, let's talk about housekeeping matters. Many of you have done webinars before, so we'll make this really quick. One, do not wait for the end of the presentation to ask your question. We don't want you to sit there for 45 minutes and have to remember it. So, unlike a Zoom meeting, you can't use the chat feature for that. What you can do is you can use the Q&A module. It literally says question and answer. There are a couple, you can make your question anonymous. You can identify yourself if you want. That's one of the beauties about being in a webinar, that you can ask your questions, and that's the place to do it. If you have a technical question, like the audio is not working, something is stuck, something is broken, please direct your question to Sergio. Sergio Martinez is my excellent colleague who's helping set this up behind the scenes. He will address your technical questions. Just put Sergio in the front and we'll direct the question to him. And then we're going to have at least one poll for you to go through and share some insight with. And as you already know, this is being recorded and we'll be sharing information for you and some documents with you at the end of the conversation. So those are housekeeping matters. If you don't have any other questions, and I don't see any, and neither does Scott, so let's get right to it. Should we do our poll?
Yeah, let's
Let's
go
do
for
our
it.
poll. We're going to launch a poll. This is going to take just a few minutes, and it relates somewhat directly to the example I gave, to the story. If your law firm was a hotel, which brand would it be? So far, no one has confessed to Motel 6.
Just be honest.
It's okay. I don't know. This poll question has a bunch of, keep on going. We have excellent. We're already at 70% participation. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so, just to make sure to give everybody a chance. That thank you for your participation. We greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate it. So here are the results. We're at 90% participation. So that's outstanding. Anything higher than that is like a North Korean election by choice, by force. So we don't need 100%
Good idea.
participation. 90% participation is awesome. So 11% of the people said Four Seasons. No one said Motel 6. No one said DoubleTree or Hampton. And then evenly divided, 44% Hilton or Sheraton, 44% said JW Marriott and Hyatt. So a couple interesting things to strike about this. First of all, the fact that 90% of you could answer this question says that these hotel chains have a brand. The just me telling you the name of the brand name, I don't tell you anything about it. Me just saying DoubleTree, me being to Hilton, JW Marriott, Four Seasons, or Mandarin Oriental tells you enough just from hearing the name that you associate something with it, such that you can say, I'm like it, I'm dissimilar to it. So that by itself. So my last question to you before I turn this over to Scott is, imagine if the question was in reverse. We were speaking to a group of people at a hotel convention, the people who run hotels, and we said to them, your hotel is which like of the following law firms? Do you think you would get 90% participation? And the answer is you would probably not. Why? Because they would all be staring at each other going, I've either never heard of this or the name doesn't evoke a thing to me. I don't know. Am I like Smith, Jones, Tooley, and Johnson? I don't know. I don't know anything about them. I just made up that name. That tells you whether you have a brand or not. And it's also really interesting. 44% Hilton Sheraton, 44% Marriott Hyatt, 11% Four Seasons Mandarin Oriental. What struck you about this poll, Scott?
Everybody thinks fairly highly of themselves, which is great.
Yeah. So let's talk about DoubleTree and
Yeah.
Hampton is an interesting market segment in part because they have a distinctive thing, like come in and get a warm cookie, but the rest of the hotel experience isn't distinctive. And so that might be the difference between what a real brand is, or a brand at one level, and a brand that's a full experience. It could be a brand that you glom on like a chocolate chip cookie to. It's
Mhm.
not, it's that's saying it's not a brand. The fact is people recognize it, but it does tell you about the difference between brands. So let's end the poll. And with that, let's take it to why now, and then we'll turn it over to Scott to really talk about what is a brand. The reason we're having this conversation now is because branding has been more important to law firms now than in the last 30 years I've been involved in the law firm, either as an associate, more senior lawyer, as a consultant to lawyer, as a recruiter to law firms. And the reason is, let me give you one slide that just gives you a snippet of the world we're in, of why if you don't have a brand, you're really underperforming. You're really not giving yourself the maximum opportunity to get the benefit of a brand. And that is story from February of this year. And the story is something that 10 years ago would have required a deep amount of explanation. You mean an accounting firm is launching a law firm? What is that all about? So, one of the things that's really interesting is that whatever you think about this, the very fact that an organization with four letters, KPMG, Big Four, tells you just in that snippet, few words and letters, a ton about what's happening. It's consolidation, nationalization, different practice areas, an enormous amount of market forces are behind this one example that make it possible. Deregulation, a lot of things are happening that the average size of the law firm is getting bigger, the market is getting more crowded, it's harder to get attention. So if you're just a regular law firm for 15, 20 years ago, is going to be much harder to get attention from all the audiences you need to get attention from. And that is in part what a brand is about. So let's take a deep dive about that and take it away, Scott.
Yeah, so I'll kind of do the Sesame Street version first of what really branding is and how it's different from maybe what you might think it might be. So this is like a fun little illustration here of marketing, advertising, and so on. So it's, marketing is more of like, hey, I am a great financial planner. Like you should pick me. Advertising is just saying it over and over and over and over and over again, right? And then PR is really just trying to control the narrative, but you're having somebody else really do it for you of saying, hey, he is a great financial planner. And, whether that's a good conversation and or a bad one, you're trying to do that. Whereas brand building, brand itself is someone basically saying, I understand you are a great financial planner. And so when we look at marketing, marketing is everything you say it is. Where, and I'll talk about this later, is branding is really everything, what they say about you. So go ahead and the next slide. So branding is that gut feeling that people have about your company, whether it's a good one or not. Seth Godin has this great analogy where he's like, imagine if Nike had a hotel and what that would look like. And so you're looking at, the court, maybe the front desk is a dugout, or, you're kind of imagining all these different things that Nike might incorporate into a hotel. But imagine if we take, similar to like a Motel 6, or we take a Sheraton or whatever it may be, but imagine if they made a shoe. And so a lot of times it really weeds out what is maybe a commodity versus what is a brand. So it's harder to really imagine how that is. And so, like I said, again, branding is what you can go to the next slide, it's fine. Branding is not what you say it is, it's what people say about you. And a successful brand is where that conversation is the same. So if I say something like racehorse, everybody in their brain thinks racehorse. They're not thinking giraffe, they're not thinking zebra, they're not thinking the Budweiser horses or whatever it may be. Okay, they're all thinking, racehorse, and that's a consistent thing. But the hard part is sometimes that also might get skewed. We've seen that in a lot of different ways where, for instance, Chevrolet recently coming out with some of the electric cars, and all of a sudden their brand shift changes because the people who love muscle and they love engines and they love everything that conversation starts going astray. So how do we maintain that? How do we make sure that everything is consistent across the board? So on the big scope of things, go ahead and go next slide. This is what you would think of if you really were to look at branding in its entirety. So usually what we say is branding starts with strategy and starts with that foundation. So you're looking at purpose, vision, mission, values. You're starting with your team, you're starting in-house, you're starting with the core of who you are, what your company's about, founded on. A lot of people start with this and they have their mission and values. And then that turns over to, okay, well, who's our audience? Okay, who's our competitors? What differentiates us? Is there something that we only do? Is there an onlyness to us that not everybody else does? How do we define? How do we differentiate? How do we add value? And taking all of those components and really creating what that would be. So then from there, we can start communicating our core message. We can start storytelling our framework, adding our taglines, adding our core messaging, and then we can really just start having that brand expression come out. So a lot of people mistake it. It's like, oh, branding is just a logo. It's just something you put on your shoe or chest or, on your documents. But that is only one sort of visual expression that is happening within a company to the outward presence. But really, when we start differentiating, when we start filling up tires at, as people come into the hotel, that is a part of, how we're differentiating. That is a part of our vision, our purpose. That is, the personality and voice that comes out at every touch point of the company so that there's a consistency throughout the entire standpoint of brand. So if you've never had a full understanding of branding, hopefully this is it. But really, when you hear the word branding, that I really want you to think about is, okay, like what are people saying about me versus what I think my company is. So starting to listen to that audience.
Okay, and so there are some warning signs, and warning signs can be problematic things, or they could be kind of telltale signs that you are unusually likely to need a rebrand because rebranding leaves clues. This isn't just something that suddenly appears one day most of the time. Occasionally, some outside crisis or something changes things really dramatically, but most of the time, especially with professional services firms, especially with law firms, it's not an emergency, it's not a crisis that tends to cause the need for the rebrand. The evidence was there, and there are certain patterns that absolutely are worth paying attention to. So we're going to talk about them in general terms, and then we're going to give some specific examples from our experience working with law firms and others as to when you should be more mindful than most that you might need to rebrand.
Yeah. So really, I mean, number one is confusion. Oftentimes you'll say, all right, can your 4-year-old say exactly what you do? And my buddy the other day is like, when he asked his kid what he did for a living, he just talked on the phone and laughed, right? And that was what he does. He doesn't do sales, he doesn't do marketing. He just talks to people on the phone and he laughs, right? So, but really, client can explain exactly what you do. And oftentimes, with what I see with law firms, is sometimes there's a generalization. Sometimes there's not a special, there's no really one field that we're particularly good at or not, and we kind of just master of none. But also, from a client standpoint, they may not have the resources available for them to really promote you. So even on the back end, there might be some confusion or some way where they can't be your champion of the brand because they have nothing that really kind of ties into how you help them, or maybe they're not getting an opportunity to tell that story. And so then there's some distance and confusion between what you're actually doing for what you really are doing. So I don't know if you've seen any confusion that from your side, Gideon.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about, before we talk about specific examples, about in the context of a law firm, what does confusion mean, or what does it mean we understand what you do? So, one of the things that distinguishes hotels from law firms, um, or any other profession, is that there's no pretense that the person using the service has any idea of in detail what the service provider does. So, for example, if you're a litigation client and you retain someone, you may have no idea what a motion in limine is. You may have no idea when looking at a transactional document whether the reps and warranties were well documented or not, right? People don't know technically whether the surgeon used the right suture or what material they used or what technique they used. So we're not talking about, for a professional service firm in particular, and law firms in particular, that they understand the mechanics of what you do, or even can make a professional judgment as a peer. Now, occasionally your clients are. Some of you in the audience might have your clients be in-house counsel at law firms and corporations and people who used to actually have your job. They are in a rare position where they actually did your job and are judging you based on that criteria. And even for them, a brand exists. So one of the questions that I think is the most telling is the first one is there confusion about what you do? And what, for instance, when people ask you, oh, I didn't know that you did that, or I didn't know that you represented this client, or I didn't know that you did this work, or more importantly, not the I didn't know you were a family law attorney, but wow, I didn't realize you handle super highly contested cases involving celebrities, or I didn't know you handled such big cases, or the opposite might be, hey, I didn't realize that you work in collaborative law and that you really work with, hey, I want everybody to get along. I specialize in solving kids, situations where it's amicable and there are children present, and our whole presence is to help people with children make the best decisions for their children. That is a feeling. That is based on knowledge because people both think their way and feel their way out of hiring you as a lawyer in a law firm. So the confusion isn't the technical detail, it's the, oh, I didn't realize you did that. And that can be a good thing, meaning, wow, you are underselling. I didn't realize you work at such a sophisticated level. And Scott will have an example of that in a different firm, in a non-law firm example. Or it could be, I just didn't realize that this was part of your expertise. And this is particularly a problem for law firms. If your firm name is just the name of three or four people and your website domain is just their initials, LAWCOM, then you're leaving an enormous wide gap for people to have no idea what you do beyond, I guess you're a law firm, but I don't know anything else about you. It's a little bit like saying, I guess you're a restaurant, but I have no idea what kind of food you prepare. Is it high end? Do you have a specialty? Like, like what is it? Like, I have no idea what you're really passionate about. You're just kind of a law firm. I know you do law. It doesn't mean anything to me. So the quintessential sign that that is confusion. The next thing is to look at is certain kinds of transitions make you much more likely to need rebranding. So here are four specific ones that I've literally consulted on where the firm has a way of doing business, was named after the founding generation, and there's a succession planning. They want an intergenerational transition of a law firm. That's a lot of the work we do. And the new generation either wanted to do something different, they also wanted to do a new name, they also wanted to do a logo. And just to reiterate what Scott said, just because you're changing your brand, your design, or your logo, that's not the same as changing your brand. That is often a part of the
Right.
look and the feel, but it's not the same. And a succession planning situation, you have to explain to a new generation of clients or employees who you're about, or you're changing your focus. Similar situation, you're getting ready for sale. Here's a common example. A firm is named after an individual, And because of that focus, it's wants to rebrand in the same way that when you stage a house, you're going to change the look and feel of the house so it has a broader appeal. So getting ready for sale is an often time for a trigger for where you might need to be rebranded. Changing the focus of your practice. If you've been known as one kind of law, one kind of geography, then and you're changing that and that becomes a sizable part of your business, you're either going to change your brand or you're going to create a new brand. Like Disney is a masterful at that. They have the Disney brand, and then when they make movies that are like a little bit more edgy, a little bit more, right, a little away from their core Disney brand and what that evokes for people, they just create Buena Vista Films. They just create a brand and say that is going to be associated. The weird thing about it is that technique, that tool is 100% available to law firms. You almost never see it because they're all, and I say this as I'm a fourth generation lawyer through my mom, inactive status, and I was a lawyer for 10 years myself, but we never think that way. We try to cram more and more stuff into the same name, the same look, the same feel, and we don't need to. And it goes without saying, if you're changing your client base, if you're going from being, hey, we serve sushi and now we're serving something else, rebranding is almost going to be imperative. But the basic idea is any significant transition makes you an important candidate for branding. And Scott is going to talk to you about why and give you some additional examples.
Yeah, so like we said, I mean, people aren't buying your services, they're buying your relationships, they're buying your stories. Branding ties into all of that. But one thing that we've also noticed is there's a significant amount of inconsistency in different touch points of the business. And so oftentimes with a law firm, especially if there's multiple offices across the country, you're going to see a slight mix in maybe what logo we use, what colors we use, how do we have certain conversations, what's the current nameplate that we're using. There's a lot of different things happening. I mean, I see it in a lot of other firms like Keller Williams, for instance. I think there are agents that still use the logo of their origin, of their originality when they first started, and then now all the way to the KW only. But that changes, and there's a significant amount of inconsistency throughout the entire cycle. And sometimes, even from a visual standpoint, you're really, really good at what you do, but you're not really good at showing it. And so the next example is, are we doing this word first?
Yeah, we are apparently.
Yeah, so
Go for it.
yeah, so like I said, with the consistency, there needs to be an alignment across every touch point. There needs to be the both visual, tonal, whatever it may be, and so you may have a senior partner that is working with a certain letterhead, or you might be introducing something else as there's a name change. And so as the brand keeps evolving and as the firm keeps evolving, the consistency keeps getting further and further and further away. And so it's really important that, like we said, from the website to the courtroom, that there is a pattern that everyone can continue to recognize. And every time that gets deviated, then that there's a crucial part where there starts to set in confusion. And that goes back to the other result of who you are, what you're really about. And so what we're looking at is how do we clarify and how do we define where we are in that legal marketplace of like, who do you serve? How do you deliver? Why does it matter? And having that tie into also the visual aspects of it, people can understand it immediately. And it's hard because you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. You're dealing with both sides of the law. You're dealing with, especially if you're dealing with multiple practices. And so how do you maintain control? So a lot of times there's a lack of what we call maybe a brand style guide. that sort of has these guides and rules and regulations that allows for, a boundary line to stay within. Maybe that's further away for some companies, so there's some flexibility, but there's also, when you have the inconsistency, you have the lack of clarity, then that starts to really diminish that credibility where you're trying to assert some authority, where you have the inability to, consistently have thought leadership, and the firm's values are sort of just weighing from side to side. And so what you want to do is, as you build as you build consistency, that will result in a lot of clarity. And then from there, we can start implementing the thought leadership. We can start implementing the clarity and credibility, and then people can really see, oh, like this is the values of the firm because this consistently shows up every single time.
Yeah, and so in practice in a law firm, let's talk about what that means. So when you are hiring a law firm, you're also hiring a lawyer, and depending on the nature of the circumstances, you might be hiring the lawyer first, and that happens a lot. I happen to work with two of the biggest law firms in the country that now each has well over 1,000 or 2,000 lawyers. And they're representing corporations in around the world in 30 different offices in 20 plus different countries. So on one level, if you're thinking about brand, there's the visual, right? So no matter what office you look at, it looks the logo looks the same, but that's really superficial. There are going to be certain things that if you are working across practice areas, across different lawyers, what are the touch points, to use a really important word that Scott used, that are going to be similar or not or close to identical, and they're going to be deliberate choices. And in order for it to be branding, it has to be something that another law firm might choose not to do, or many law firms choose not to do. So it can't be something like um, we follow the rules of professional conduct, and we send them a bill that tells them what services we provided, right? Or if you're in a particular area of law, if there's a certain process or procedure that's court required, or you do the same thing as everybody else when you do an M&A transaction, and we require people to do an NDA, that's not branding. That's just required. The question is, it has to be something that is not required. It's something distinctive. It doesn't mean that you're the only firm in its kind. So you might be, we really pride ourselves on we're not going to be argumentative. We're not going to make personal attacks. We're not, I've worked with firms that that's part of their culture. And yes, there are going to be some variations among lawyers, but when they think about who they hire, who they promote, how they act, what they train, the level of community involvement, the kinds of cases they take and don't take. Um, there's going to be something that they do. It's not going to be just one thing. It's going to be a variety of things. And the way you'll know you're in the right direction is that they're optional, they're not required, and they are you have a unique specific reason why you do it. It ties into our vision of what a lawyer is, a vision of what a partner is. It's a vision of what the community we serve is. And therefore we do something consistent with that vision. So for example, you can imagine one element of that is a law firm that decides to sponsor the little league in its community, right? Now, I'm not saying that every law firm needs to do it, or you need to do even something similar. And if you do it just as we are just a regular law firm and we attended a branding conference and someone said, "Hey, have you thought about going and opening a sport, sponsoring a little league sports team?" Then it doesn't work because then it's a little bit like we have a hotel and we have to give you cookies. People might remember it, but it's not like fully a brand. If, on the other hand, you say, look, the reason we started a firm, our core values are this, we hire people, we promote people, this is an integral part of what we do, and consistent with that, this is the charities we support, these are the organizations we interact with, this is how we handle our vacation time, then when you consistently educate people about that, then it has credibility. Then you're beginning to be an actual brand. So let's give an example. It's one of my favorite examples. When I first met Scott, he gave me this example, and I thought this is a great example to, even though it doesn't involve a law firm, this is very helpful, help me understand kind of the level of detail that Scott gets into in his work. So take it away, Scott.
Yeah, so we interacted with this client, and literally it started with, "Hey, I need you to, fit my logo into a social media box." And they were starting to get on social media, and they had a landscape logo, and they needed some way to change it, simple fix. And for me, as a designer and branding person, I was just like, I couldn't tell what kind of company they were. Meaning, I had no idea whether they were, like we put it here, they're a Ferrari or a Honda Civic. They're making their cabinets out of the garage, or they have a big facility. And so, I wanted to continue the conversation. So I asked them to see their shop and go through everything. And as we were talking, and as he was explaining, how they're taking wood from a single log, from a continuous thing, and creating these huge, 100,000, 200,000, 400,000 jobs, and these entire houses. It quickly became known to me that, like, they needed, and I don't often, like Gideon said, it's not just a logo, but they needed something where the feeling of their company was not, the different touch points was not screaming Ferrari. It wasn't screaming everything they were able to do. They're really, really good at what they did, but there's a severe lack from an outside perspective of this prestige, this everything that they were trying to communicate to me and kind of bragging about. Nothing was exuding that. So we can go to the next slide. And so, branding is this set of expectations, memories, stories, and when we're looking at how this all works and how this all comes into play, they had an amazing story of how it's third generation and they're able to do all these different things, and they take pride in their company, and they hire within, and all these different aspects that they were trying to show and tell and be. But really, when from an outside looking in, there was a severe lack of telling that story. There was actually nothing that was showing who they are and what they're about. And so what we ended up doing was looking. So there's an example of their logo, and their firm. And so when they showed up at the job site, it wasn't anything. It was just a van, the expressions in wood. And really, when we were having this conversation, there was sort of this kind of dated, low value expectation that things were coming. And we're also, yes, we were working in kind of a construction type of field where maybe that's not also exuding expensive, right? And so their biggest problem, their biggest competitor, they said, was themselves. They said they were always the most expensive. So whether they paid for it or they didn't, but they weren't necessarily exuding expense. And so, at its core, we're trying to, find our tribe. We're food, shelter, water, but then we're trying to get these different things of prestige or whatever. And so I said, okay, if I line up your logo and I line up your guys and I line up everything outside of everything that you do, would you pick your company over somebody else? And are you losing, so maybe in a higher term, are you losing any market capital due to the fact of how you look, right? Do you exude expense? Are you telling the story of everything that you can do? And ultimately, the answer was no. And so what we ended up changing was, they were able to go ahead and go on the next slide. Um, so one, they go by EIW, and so we were able to allow for them to express EIW as far as just an initial and their logo being able to be transformative into, as small as a pencil and as big as a billboard. So there's some flexibility creatively, but also we're able to, say we're established in this state. We're also to say that we do millwork and fine cabinetry. Like everything was sort of just lacking, and then now we have what would be the EIW as a identifier. We have a nameplate. We have a tagline. We have a date. We have all these different things, and then that leading into an experience. So similar to the experience that Gideon had as he goes to the hotel, they're not necessarily trying to say, hey, welcome to the most expensive hotel you've ever been to, but they're trying to have an experience for each and every client that is consistent, that is maintained, that is high quality, and sometimes that is visual. That is where we're looking at, a Mercedes Benz versus a Honda. Like the Honda Civic, it's gonna go as long as it's gonna go. It's gonna last forever. It's gonna be reliable, and you can use it as long as you want to use it. But when we're talking about luxury and we're talking about expense and we're talking about price, then all of a sudden we start turning into more of a commodity versus I just want to use you because I know you're going to do a good job, because I know you're going to be the best. And so when we can sort of position and redefine what that is, there's like the analogy of you can put a canvas on the floor and start throwing down paint, and then you have something there. But when you put it on the wall and you put red carpet around, and you put some tassels around it and you put a barrier around it, and then all of a sudden it becomes a masterpiece. And so that's where that velvet rope, that experience, instead of just kind of throwing something and throwing paint at the wall. And so I think the next slide is,
Yeah, yeah. Let me actually jump in for a second. So one of the things
yeah,
that's really interesting, because I know lawyers, like I say, I come from a four generation of lawyers. Half of my family are lawyers. It's almost like on four continents. It almost is a genetic defect. So I'm wondering if some of the people in the audience are thinking this way. How does my law firm relate to this? Because this example is so visual. So let's talk about that. The transformation that Scott helped this company make was about educating people about their level of craftsmanship. It told them about the level of the detail they go to, how customized it is. And yes, that translated into higher pricings. For law firms, that issue happens all the time. Most law firms, in the 20 plus years I'm advising law firms, there have been very few law firms that have been built and designed to do high volume. At which point, the highest level of craftsmanship is not one of the things that you are asking for. What you're asking for is, does it work? Is it functional? Is it compliant? Is it reliable? And is it affordable, right? Those are that model. But as soon as you get into professional services and you're not trying to do volume, you're in this world of craftsmanship. To some level of detail, you're trying to explain, here is what our craft is, here are who our craftspeople are, here's why we do this, this is why we pay so much attention to detail. And the reason is that there's a certain element to this which is similar. What's the quintessential pattern of hiring legal services is that a vast majority of the time, unless you're working on contingency, you have to establish trust before you actually get to work and show your craftsmanship. So people have to look at your past examples, and they can only evaluate you based on what they do understand. How quickly what does your place look like? How long does it take for people to answer the phone? How does your service levels. If you hand them a styrofoam cup for coffee when you're in your waiting room, what is that going to feel like? What do they feel when they're interacting with you? That they know how to compare to other experiences they have. And so you want to have a narrative, a very thoughtful, intentional idea of what our craftsmanship is about. And one of the reasons Scott and I work together is because visually and design, which plays an element of this, is obviously not my strength. And so that's why you need both. There's an enormous part of, so the message here is not, I went to a seminar and you're going to go talk to your partners and you say, you know what? I solve our problem. We need truck wraps. Truck wraps are absolutely going to solve our problem. That's not the issue. Part of it is, but the issue is, how are we going to instill trust and enthusiasm and a consistent experience? And part of that is understanding your market, and part of that is what is visually going to be consistent to showcase your craftsmanship in the best light. So that's the connection for those of you who are wondering, how am I similar to the example that Scott is presenting? So let me go show you off the end result here.
Yeah, so the end result is, we really matched the expectations to the experience. And so now when they show up, yeah, everyone looks the same, everything's wrapped, there's, branding in each and every drawer, there's this thing that exudes high profile. And so did they change the wood? Did they change the way they construct things? No, they didn't change any of that. But now we are matching what the high quality that they've already were able to produce time and time again, and the experience that each and every client had with them elevated to the top tier degree. And so then what that did is the conversation started happening between each and every client, and then prices started going up because people just wanted to have that same experience. And so then, similar to Gideon of talking and sharing everybody about his tire experience, then that drove up demand, that drove up prices, and simply by just exuding and telling the story and showing a narrative that each and everybody has. And so now they're already booked out a year in advance. They keep raising prices, and now they're in a different hemisphere where they're not dealing with now just the average person. They're dealing with the architect, they're dealing with the designer, they're shifting most of their products from a B2C to a B2B, because now those people are, trying to set up that similar experience and aligning themselves. So as you're kind of similar what you might align with other firms or other professional services, you're trying to match where you want to be, or you're in that level, but there needs to be some sort of similar experience or similar range where that narrative, and you're controlling that, and there's consistency there. And so this is just one of many examples, obviously, but I wanted to kind of share this because we're able to then eliminate the conversation of price. And with a true brand, then we're interjecting the conversation of value. And then when you only have the conversation of value and not price, then there's longevity there, there's consistency there, there's profitability there, and you're really be able to kind of position yourself as the expert within your field.
Yeah, and that can't the importance of that can't be overstated in terms, especially in a market that there's a lot of consolidation, and there's going to be global firms, and we might we're seeing the beginning of law firms and accounting firms merging, and so the question is, how are you going to stay distinctive? And so one of the things that you notice about this example is, and let me get some really great questions, so let's address some of them, is, does branding always involve changing your name? And the answer is no. I mean, an Expression in Wood is an example of, they didn't change their name. They didn't go from the formal change of their name. What they did is, for people like me, and I would be one of these people, I don't understand wood. I just don't. But if people show up and everything looks exactly aligned, everyone's dressed the same, everything looks perfectly centered, everything is sharp and crisp, and it gives you a feel that I can trust them, that they're going to pay that kind of attention when they use the right glue to adhere the right wood to the right surface and stuff I don't really want to even think about. And so in a law firm, the challenge is you have individual expertise that's different. You want to make sure that continues to be, you're not trying to create robots and everybody be the same. But you then, that makes the feeling of, from the client's point of view, what are the touchstones of content, of contact? What are the visual clues that I am going to an actual cohesive company where they're craftspeople. They're going to care about me. They really understand the details, so I don't have to worry. And they're not just a collection of people who happen to go into the same building and occasionally happen to be in the same office or occasionally go on the same Zoom. And that problem is becoming bigger and bigger, because otherwise what's going to happen is, for firms that don't become a brand, if your name or the experience you have isn't doesn't go beyond, well, they're good lawyers, then you're going to become a commodity. Then you're going to be, well, I don't know what makes them different, so let me judge them by what I can tell, and I can tell price. And then you end up being asked by price. So that's one problem. And if you're not prepared to do volume, then don't go compete on price. And the other is that if no one asks for you by name, then you're not a brand. If your entire business is, well, let me go find people who are just, oh, let me go find an ERISA lawyer, which is incredibly improbable on Google that you would be able to build that kind of practice. So, especially if you're not in the B2C world, where in personal injury, you might be able to do that if you have a big enough megaphone, you can get enough internet traffic, and then that's how you get your brand, just by sheer repetition. It's an advertising model. But for everybody else, a branding model is, you hold, the purpose is, I want people to ask for me by name. When I go to a city, I'm like, oh, see if they have a Marriott nearby. Not, please do a Google search within 3 blocks of the conference I'm attending and tell me what's the cheapest hotel. And for service providers in general and law firms in particular, this is becoming more important than ever. So for a law firm, the corresponding message, Scott gave you a highly visual example that didn't involve a name change, but it did involve a huge amount of confusion between, oh, I didn't realize, I thought you were working at this level. I didn't realize you were working at this level of expertise, sophistication, customization, and that naturally costs more. So for a law firm, what you want to do, and let me give you this example, is, and let me give you an example we work with a lot, succession planning or getting ready for a sale. Law firms are often really bad in understanding the narrative, the way that to connect the dots to tell the story that is attractive to people and is based on reality. So you can't say we are the most collegial law firm, where if anybody goes to your, interact with any of your lawyers for 3 minutes, they can tell you're not collegial. And by the way, 10 years ago, just for laughs, I looked at the websites of the 100 largest law firms in the country at that time, and 90, fully 9 out of 10 mentioned somewhere that they were collegial. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. So part of it has to be authentic, but what you want is, you want a narrative that explains what you do in a way that attracts the people you want to attract and detracts the people you want to detract, right? You don't want to be all things to all people. So, for instance, I was working with an estate planning law firm, and they didn't understand that what made them distinctive is two things. They understood they had tax expertise, and they understood that they worked with more business owners than the people in their surrounding county. But what they didn't connect is the extent to which they had worked for multiple generations of clients. When we did analysis of their clients, both by zip code and by age, we saw that they had been working in an estate planning firm. Something like 40% of their clients were over the age of 68. And so I said, if that's the client base you want, tell that story. You got to go connect the dots. And that ended up being a crucial element of their brand, because that identified who the audience is. We work with people like you. We solve problems, and even more sophisticated problems than you are likely to have. You have And then the brand became, we are a comfortable place. We do things in a traditional way. We do things that appeal to that audience. We are new in technology, but we're old school as a lawyer. And that was an element of the narrative we helped them create that you can then supplement and intertwine with visuals. But if you don't have a narrative and you're like, our narrative is we're really good lawyers, well, no one, as far as I can tell, says we kind of went to law school by accident. We've been kind of, I don't know, we're not really sure we want to be lawyers. We kind of doing this by habit. I don't know. Like it seems like a thing to do. There is no marketing campaign, even though I do know lawyers for whom that's not a terribly inaccurate description of who they are, but no one markets themselves that way. So you need a narrative combined with the visual. So that is the element of branding. Um, Another question, how long does this take? So if you are in a situation, like how long did the project you dealt with, Scott, that you showed us involving the wood paneling company, and how long did that take?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a terribly long process, but we often say you can't see the warning label from inside the bottle. So you have to take a few steps outside and really re-examine what is happening, what's being communicated on all different levels from the different departments of within the company. But then there's also the legacy that we had to consider. You know, uh, Dad and grandpa were still alive. And so, and then son was taking it over. So, from a third generation standpoint, how do we have a conversation between the three to pay homage to the people who kind of built it and grew it to who's operating it now? And so, within the time frame, I mean, I would say that initial kind of start was anywhere from like 2 to 3 months to have the different conversations, to go through different iterations of design, to sit down, because there was a stopping point where dad did not like it, and so son, who now owns the company, there had to be sort of a moment where who is it, whose business is it really, and then adding in certain factors to the branding to show that we're not trying to rob you of what you built, but we're trying to have it be flexible and grow to the next generation. And so after that conversation, it was a matter of just rolling it out. And so there is a level of maybe confusion that their clients will have for a little while, as far as now who what the company is. But after that initial, oh, I really like this, and rolling it out, but it also gave them opportunity to highlight and go circle back to a lot of their best clients and or people who refer them the most business, to raise a level of excitement. So then there's a level of excitement within previous clients, new clients, as well as internally, by developing a brand that people wanted to represent and be a part of. It actually built more excitement and joy within just the employees themselves.
Yeah, and so let me just answer that question for law firms, and then we'll wrap up. And let me just say, Scott and I are absolutely going to stick around for people who have questions. We have like 1.5 more minutes. Stick with us, and we have some documents for you for follow up. The same answer, strangely, for law firms. You wouldn't think it's the same, um, unless there's a crisis where, and we've had it where someone says the founding partner told us this morning that we're not that he or she's not re-signing the lease, and the lease expires in 6 weeks, and then we had to make an enormous amount of changes in succession planning and rebranding. And I did that and like worked with that in like 3 months. And the first 6 weeks of some of the gray hair you see was that 6 week period. But most of the time, once you get a threshold of like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2, 3 months, you get a consensus. Rolling it out, this is not a multi-year process unless you wanted to. Usually it's getting a consensus, and then you can really begin to take steps pretty quickly. It's nothing you can generally do, recommend you do in a long weekend, but it's not something that has to take years or years either.
Right.
So as we're finishing up, so just wanted to give you a follow-up um, uh, that let me just say, okay, so if there are a couple ways we're going to share you follow-up information. There's a follow-up document from it's an assessment from Scott. There's a short 7, 8 question quiz for me about like, are you likely to, like, do you have the telltale signs you might need branding or rebranding?
Hmm.
So if you have a QR code on your phone, a QR code reader on your phone, literally you can access both documents. If you can't, and this is not, there's no technology knowledge threshold to be in this webinar, give us 24 hours and we will email this to everyone because we want to give you follow-up information. We want to give you an assessment so you can start implementing some of the questions. So with that, let me do this. Um, I see there are a couple of questions. Let me do this. We are at an hour, and so for those of people, we promised an hour. We're going to wrap things up. For people who want to stick around, there are at least one, maybe two questions that I do want to go and give everybody the value that we promised and make sure that their questions get answered. So with that, thank you everybody for attending. Everything you need to know about rebranding your law firm. Scott Clauson, been an honor doing this with you. From Clauson Arts, Gideon Grunfeld from Rainmaking for Lawyers, and with that, let's officially end this here. But for other questions,
So we have the slide, the goals, maximum.
let me go up. So the question we have, what was the slide with value that was skipped over? Wow, that's someone who's paying attention to me in the interest of time. Um, it might be this one.
Yep.
Okay. So let me, great question, and thank you. So this is after we talked about like in a law firm, then, and this is an accounting firm, this is most professional services. You need to connect the dots because if you leave it to other people to figure out, you're like, well, you do tax and audit, you do child support, child custody, you do, what happens is people say, what's price and what's job description? They don't know you as a brand, they know you as a job description. Like you're an estate planning lawyer. I guess you do wills and trusts. They don't, that's not a brand. That's just a job description. So what are the benefits? What are the values of, especially for professional services, especially for law firms, is that it depends on where you position yourself in the market. The example, one of the reasons I love Scott's example is, although it seems like there's not much in common with law firms, it is a company that initially made a decision. Here's how we go about building and creating things, and we're going to do it at a high level. But they were mismatched with the clients they were trying to attract and the projects for which their expertise, that focus is appropriate. And so a strong brand directly leads to client acquisition exactly in the same way for law firms. It is aligns the people with what the craftsmanship that you are promoting, the work you most want to attract that makes your people the most excited, should align with attracting the clients who want that experience. Because if you're trying to sell very high-end, custom-made woodwork to someone who goes, so long as it doesn't burn, I don't care, that's not, you might have a brand, but then you have the wrong client. So the number one thing this does for you, it gives you client acquisition. It aligns you to find the right clients that fit your business model, fits your positioning, educates them, and it attracts people. And then you get a tribe because, as Scott pointed out, someone who says, "Hey, that law firm, they're super responsive, or they this and they did this with billing and they were super nice, or they were really whatever it is that they did, they invited me to this event, they introduced me to this community." They're not just lawyers, they're gatekeepers to the whole community. If that's part of your brand, then those people tell other people and go, "Oh, I would like that too." And you begin to get a chain reaction of like-minded people. The pricing power of this is really potent. At the end of the day, if the goal is to get you to be asked for by name, that means that most pricing objections go out the window. Not entirely, but mostly. Because if someone says, find me a law firm, an accounting firm, a business valuation firm, an actuarial firm that does X in this community, then price is going to matter. But if someone says, get me Clauson Arts, unless Scott quotes them some insane amount of money, they're going to be like, okay, we wanted Clausen art. So you want the pricing quality. It gives you pricing power. Now, pricing power does not necessarily mean premium highest. It can mean that, but it could be what distinguishes us is we work with startups. We work with this and we are totally committed to them. So everything in our business, everything in our firm is oriented to helping startups compete and get off the ground and make it through that first 2, 3 year period. And our pricing is we have subscription models. We have this. Come to our seminar where you're going to go get business advice. And then you're doing it that way. But it gives you pricing related to the brand, related to the clients. Retention and referrals, people stay longer because there's a natural fit. And talent. This is not only an external process, it's an internal process. In fact, when we do projects, I don't know if you do this, Scott, the first place where we test a rebrand is not on potential clients, not on potential referral sources. We test it on employees. Because if employees are like, yeah, that doesn't seem authentic, or they're bored by it, or they're not excited by it, that's a sign that we have more work to do in the narrative, or we have more work to do in the rebranding and the visuals. How about you? Like, how do you use like internal employee or internal kind of engagement to test what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they're the first source of what this company is. When I went back to the original conversation of it's not what you say it is, it's what they say about you, and oftentimes that loudest voice is from within. And so you're going to get a true sense of where you stand and who you are, and oftentimes we'll also ask not people that directly have worked with them, or but people who refer to them and their general feedback of what they have or likes or dislikes. And so we're looking at all these different things, and just kind of circle back a little bit. When we're looking at branding and how that kind of comes into play. The interesting part is as you get to a point where you are talking about that value proposition, and they're starting to kind of talk to you by name, and we kind of just the branding really shapes the impressions of who you are and what you're about, and then you're able to really define your positioning and where you stand. And that in itself really kind of starts to eliminate a lot of the competition when you have that clear presence, that clear story, and how you're communicating. And then that becomes, sort of a premium. So the brand, like that last point, that starts to command more within that mergers, within that succession. And so then even where you stand within that particular part of the equity, that allows you to have more position and more power.
Yeah, yeah. And so one of the issues right now the law firms are facing is talent acquisition, both on on the partner level, the associate level, paralegals and staff, non-lawyers, other non-lawyers. And when people, one of the basic things we know, there's a great book about this from David Pink, who summarizes a lot of data about, it's called drive, and it's what does drive people, and it's about paying more money isn't necessarily going to get people to be happy where you work. And people want to feel a part of something bigger than themselves, something aspirational often. And so a good brand does that. And the first people who feel it day to day and can tell if it's authentic, are the employees. And another group are vendors. That's another place where I will sometimes reach out to a longtime vendor of a law firm and say, okay, what's it really like? And here's a weird thing. A lot of times law firms are so focused on when the interaction are with lawyers and did we get this document right? And is the lawyer busy and was the lawyer responsive? And they don't think about, okay, what's it like to go interact with the accounting department? What is it like to interact with other people, and does it feel like I'm in two different places? Does it look like these are two separate entities that they've hijacked some employees and put them in one department, and it doesn't seem consistent at all? And so vendors can be a really good place to measure this, but it really does help with recruitment, retention. And then the last slide here, the last bullet point on the slide is literally, I mean, a lot of what we do is, as an increasing percentage of what we do is we're helping companies get ready for sale. And so, without going too much in the weeds, I can assure you that when look, that when firms are sold or either in a succession plan or a merger, the issue that you have is how much is the firm worth? And one of the things that absolutely gives you a premium. So if you take your revenues or your profits and you multiply it by some number to get to a price, that multiple is higher when your brand is strong. And what that means, and the reason is a new generation within your firm or a new buyer merger from the other side, from the outside, they can look at your website. They can get that traffic. It's reliable because people are coming to the name and the values and what that company stands for, what that law firm stands for. And it absolutely makes a difference and gives you a higher valuation, a higher sales price, if you will, compared to a firm where the only thing you're looking at is what's the total revenues based on how many billable hours all the lawyers have. Um, that obviously is a big base of a baseline for the valuation. But when the brand is there and it's something that a buyer or the next generation can see the value and it generates clients, that increases the valuation. And sometimes I've seen it, it's always hard to pinpoint exactly, but I would say easily 10 to 20 to 25%, as much as that, a good brand, when they have a really good connection and a strong narrative to a particular community they want to serve. It really absolutely makes a bottom line difference when you're either selling your firm or in a merger or you're doing a intergenerational transition. So that was a fabulous question. Thank you
Yeah,
for getting us back to this slide.
that was the last
What
one.
other questions do people have? We certainly appreciate everybody who's sticking around later. Let me also do this. I probably should have done this sooner. We'll do this in the slide. For those of us who want to get contact, we will obviously, our contact information will be following up with you in email. That's the way to get
Right.
hold of both Scott and me. Um, and I think between in the competition between the bow tie and my tie, I lose. So we're probably not going to have this side by side photo ever again, but that's okay. Um, Looking, any other questions, Scott? What are your final thoughts as we wrap this up? And we certainly appreciate everybody for sticking around. And if you do have more questions, absolutely continue to pose them for us. We'd love to help.
Yeah, I think the final what I would leave you with is maybe some homework of just start to maybe ask questions with your employees or the vendors you work with or friends or whomever, and just try to maybe get some real feedback of what they feel like your brand is, or have them explain what you do or your company, and start to just listen to those conversations with an honest ear and see if that's something that you are aligned with, or if there's some disconnections. And if there is, like, we'd certainly love to help, or start to maybe get with your team and reframe. But branding is something where it's like going to the gym. It's a consistent thing that you need to work on every single year or every single month or whatever it may be. Especially when we're looking at that whole holistic of what branding is. Yes, you can get plastic surgery and spend a bunch of money and get, all the things that you want. But that day in and day out, going to the gym, working is going to produce the most healthy, honest results.
Yeah, and let me just, as in closing, a couple just tangible questions and very specific questions for you to ask yourself. So for people who, if you ask them what is our brand and they don't know how to answer, which might be a bunch of people, ask your current clients or your vendors, why did you choose to work with us? Or vendors, what's different about working with us than the other people that you serve? And then you might like the answer, you might not like the answer. That's one way to begin to, that's assessment of what your current brand is. The other is this, is more aspirational. Um, who are the clients that you most want to serve? And what's the experience that you most would want to get from them? If you could kind of pre-write the testimonial or yeah, boy, you were great, beyond great lawyers, beyond great, good result. And yes, you followed you were ethical. You didn't steal my money. Like beyond those basic, critical, important too, obviously. Work from the aspiration. What is it? And here's what you're going to find. You're not going to make everybody happy. Building a brand is, I can't be all things to all people. So let me focus on who are the people, the vendors, the clients, the employees we most want to serve. Who are we passionate about serving? It also needs to make, it's not just passion, and it needs to make economic sense too. But start with what you want, and don't worry if initially it's not clear to you how we're going to build a whole firm, or what every element of how we're going to build that narrative out. That's the kind of stuff that Scott and I have decades of experience helping people make real. But the one part that makes our job easier is if you can tell us where you're aspiring to get to and a little bit of the why, and we'll bring that out of you. That is the great beginning of a conversation. And with that, look at these documents. And if for some reason this doesn't work for us, and if someone wants us to know in the Q&A whether the QR code worked, and let me do this. I don't know if I need to do this for this to work better. Um, but yeah, you should be able to get the documents, whether you did or not. We are going to send you the email tomorrow.
Yep.
And let's give you a few seconds to test your QR code skills. And with that, let's get down to wrapping this up. Again, on behalf of Scott Clauson of Clauson Arts, thank you so much for being here, for everything you need to know about rebranding your law firm. I'm Gideon Grunfeld from Raking for Lawyers. It's been a pleasure, and Scott and I look forward to serving you in any way we can. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.